You know, coming into work today, Peter, in Hong Kong, there are policemen on every single corner. This is after Beijing stated that elections will not be fully free here in Hong Kong. What does it mean for investors?
Well, I think in the short term, the impact is limited, and the Hang Seng Index is up. But I think the real point, the real takeaway from this decision is that Hong Kong is really left with only bad choices, partly to do with this democracy debate, but also in the long term, really about the future relationship between Hong Kong and mainland China. And you've got to remember that for 17 years, China has basically been hands-off with Hong Kong. It's essentially allowed it to carry on as it did before, and that was really not what a lot of people expected. But this democracy ruling really tells us something about China's influence. It's basically said to the people of Hong Kong, you have two choices. One, you can have one person, one vote, universal suffrage, but only for candidates that we have carefully vetted beforehand. Or basically this whole discussion goes away and we stick with the system we have at the moment, which is where a chief executive gets elected by a very small group of people. And so that's the tough position that Hong Kong people find themselves in now.
As you say, Beijing clearly showing its hands in its announcement on Sunday. And so far, business people have not been too upset about the idea of what could happen here. But if we do get protests, and we do see civil disobedience, especially in the business districts here, surely at some point that may have some impact.
I think that's right. I mean, the protests, we yet to see how big the protests will be or how sustained they will be. There's really there's no sign that Beijing is willing to compromise on this, so you just have to slightly wonder what these protests would achieve. But that would be the most visible symptom of this, and that could lead to some disruption. But actually, it's kind of emblematic of the broader dissatisfaction in Hong Kong with the leadership of the city and with the influence from mainland China and the influence from Beijing. And that actually should be a worry, not just to the ordinary voters, but also to people who run businesses here, to financial institutions, because basically Beijing has been hands-off with Hong Kong for 17 years. It's allowed the city to carry on as before, and that means that you still have a working legal system, that people can get their contracts enforced here, which you cannot on the mainland. And if this decision basically says that A, China's going to be more interventionist with Hong Kong, and B, it cares less about what the rest of the world thinks about what it does with Hong Kong, then that would be a worry for everybody in Hong Kong, and not just the people who want one person, one vote.
Hong Kong on alert after Beijing makes it clear how it wants to run elections in the city. Investors may be on their toes if protests continue to rise.